They underestimated her for being a janitor until she checkmated the CEO's empire. The CEO hit the floor right in the middle of a billion-dollar call. But the fall wasn't the worst part. It was the moment the janitor looked at his chessboard and solved in seconds a problem that Vance Tech's best consultants hadn't been able to crack in weeks. That morning, Liam Vance still felt like the most powerful man in Manhattan. The CEO of Vance Tech walked through his 80th floor office as if he owned the horizon itself, surrounded by glass, steel, and an ego expensive enough to compete with the skyscrapers outside. Until fate decided to humiliate him using something absurdly simple, a puddle of soapy water. Time seemed to freeze. In the middle of a frantic call about a billion-dollar merger, Liam felt his foot slip. His phone flew out of his hand like a bird in a panic. His leather briefcase traced a dramatic arc through the air, and his premium coffee, imported from somewhere distant and far too expensive to make any sense, exploded across his immaculate white shirt. What the hell? His body met the polished floor with a dry thud. He didn't fall gracefully. He crumbled. The man who made investors tremble now looked like a luxury penguin trying to survive on an ice rink. And it was exactly in that moment, still lying on the floor, surrounded by coffee and shattered dignity, that Liam spotted the true culprit of his humiliation, a blue plastic bucket with a happy face sticker that seemed to be mocking his misery. And then, something even more absurd happened. A hand appeared beside the onyx chessboard resting on the marble table. It was just a cleaning woman. Blue uniform, hair pulled back, an aluminum mop in her hand. Without a word, she moved one of the pieces with the tip of the mop. Check. Liam froze, because that move didn't just save the game. It solved the billion-dollar merger that was threatening to destroy his empire. "Hey, you!" Liam growled, trying to get up while his hands slipped on the lavender disinfectant. "What do you think you're doing with my—" He stopped. The scent of lavender was so strong it almost made him sneeze. In the reflection of the glass, he finally caught her face. But it was just a glimpse. Focused eyes, the expression of someone deciding whether to buy bread or save an empire, and a calm that bordered on an insult. She didn't look like a cleaning woman. She looked like a queen dressed as a commoner, dealing with a particularly clumsy subject. Elena said nothing. She simply picked up the bucket, the one with the mocking smiley face, adjusted the mop on her shoulder as if it were a scepter, and walked toward the exit with the composure of someone who had just won an Oscar, not of someone who had just watched her boss sprawled on the floor like a malfunctioning robot after a short circuit. "Get back here," Liam commanded, finally managing to stand, though one of his socks was now completely soaked. "You touched my board. Do you have any idea what each one of those pieces costs? You probably earn in a year what that night is worth." Elena stopped in front of the private elevator. She turned slightly, just enough for Liam to catch a half-smile that carried more wisdom than all the Harvard MBAs combined. "The value of a piece, sir, is not in what it's made of." Her voice was calm, deep, like a cello in the middle of a noisy fair. "It's in the move it's capable of making. And you are about to lose your kingdom out of pure fear of sacrificing a pawn." The elevator let out a cheerful ding. "Wait, who are you? What's your name?" Liam stepped forward, forgetting the floor was still treacherous. The metal doors began to close. Elena stepped into the elevator, and just before the steel swallowed her, she said only, "I'm the person who takes out the trash, sir, including the strategy mistakes you leave scattered across the table." The doors sealed shut. The silence that followed in the office was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic drip of coffee from the edge of the table onto the expensive carpet. Liam stood there, breathless, furious, and intrigued. He walked to the chessboard, each wet step making a soft, sucking sound on the floor. He stared at the position of the pieces. The move the cleaning woman had made with her mop wasn't just a chess move. It was the exact solution to the bottleneck in the billion-dollar merger he'd been negotiating. She had just saved Vance Tech between one swipe of the mop and the next. Liam looked at the elevator door, then at the coffee stain on his chest, and felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years: insignificance. He was king of the world, but a woman whose name he didn't even know had just delivered a moral checkmate before breakfast. Lavender, he whispered, the floral scent soaked into everything around him. He picked up his phone, which had miraculously survived its acrobatic flight. HR? Now, he barked. I want to know who was cleaning the executive floor 2 minutes ago. No, I don't want to fire her. Or maybe I do, just get me a name. While Liam shouted into the phone, the audience could see, through the office window, the small figure of Elena slipping out through the service gate below, melting into the New York City crowd with her bucket and her dignity intact. In her pocket, a worn, chipped wooden piece caught the sunlight, glinting against the whole glass empire she had just placed in her pocket. Liam Vance thought he ran the game. But he was about to discover that on the board of life he was nothing more than a beginner standing across from a master he had dared to underestimate. Never confuse the simplicity of a uniform with the capacity of a mind. Sometimes, the person who cleans your floor is the one with the vision to build your ceiling. And before the story continues, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching this from? I love seeing how far these stories travel, and while you're at it, tell me, from 0 to 10, what would you give this opening? Because the game between Elena and Liam is just getting started. Liam Vance was not a man who accepted defeat, much less from someone wearing a General Services badge. That night, the executive office looked less like a billion-dollar command center and more like the laboratory of a mad scientist. Liam was surrounded by high-definition screens. He'd had state-of-the-art security cameras installed, facial recognition, night vision hidden between leather-bound books and modern art sculptures. Now I've got you, Lavender Ghost, he muttered, straightening the tie that had been crooked for hours. He settled into his chair, eyes locked on the monitors. Midnight came. The silence in the building was absolute, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Then, movement on screen 4. A shadow crossed the hallway. Liam leaned so far forward he nearly fell out of his chair. The figure entered the room. He saw the gleam of a metal bucket and the rhythmic motion of a mop. "This is it!" Liam cheered, ready to pounce. But on the monitor, the image began to go strange. A white haze crept over the lens. Elena didn't just clean floors. She had developed a radar for invasive technology. She sprayed such a dense cloud of citrus disinfectant directly into the camera lens that Liam's feed turned into a yellow, foggy blur. On the next screen, the same treatment. A precise burst of spray, one firm wipe, and done. Liam was now watching an abstract, citrus-scented version of his own office. She's cleaning my cameras?" Liam shouted at the empty walls. "She's treating my $10,000 sensors like bathroom windows." Frustrated, he switched tactics. If technology failed, he'd use his intellect. He grabbed a fluorescent yellow sticky note and wrote in his hurried doctor's scrawl, "Huh? The merger's compression algorithm keeps throwing a 0.4% error. Fix it if you're as clever as the chess suggests." He pressed it right on top of the onyx king on the board. The next morning, Liam arrived at the office before sunrise. The yellow sticky note was gone. In its place, a small pink slip was stuck to his computer monitor. No complex mathematical formulas. Just a drawing of a sad face with a teardrop, and a line written in perfect handwriting. "The error isn't in the algorithm, Vance. It's in your ego. You're trying to force results before building the foundation. Clean the house before you invite company." Liam felt his face burn. He crumpled the note, but 2 minutes later, he was unfolding it to read it again. In the days that followed, the Vance Tech executive floor turned into a stationary battlefield. Liam left notes about international logistics problems, risk projections, and market ethics dilemmas. Elena replied with sharp critiques, old-fashioned proverbs, and, occasionally, technical corrections that made Liam want to throw his Oxford diploma in the trash. One Tuesday, Liam left a pointed note. "Why would someone with your mind choose the anonymity of a blue uniform? Is it fear of failing on the main stage?" The reply came on a green sticky note, stuck to the side of his ice bucket. "The main stage is wherever life happens, not where titles are printed. I'm not hiding behind the uniform. You're the one hiding behind the desk. P.S. Your coffee is terrible. Buy real beans." The humiliation was daily and, strangely, addictive. Liam began skipping important meetings to check whether a new note was hidden behind the picture frame or under the keyboard. He was obsessed. His executive assistant, Samia, walked into the room with a leather folder and an expression of barely contained impatience. Liam, the jet to London takes off in 2 hours. The British telecom investors are waiting to sign the pre-merger agreement. You need to go. Now. Liam looked at the folder, then at the chessboard. There was a new sticky note on it. He picked it up. The floor will shine brighter than usual today. I have a date with Destiny at 9 tonight. A chill ran down his spine. He couldn't miss that date. Cancel it, Liam said, eyes still on the note. I'm sorry? Samia blinked, certain she'd heard wrong. Liam, we're talking about $5 million in logistics and contracts. Cancel everything, Samia. Tell them I had a crisis of conscience, or that I caught a lavender virus. I'm not going to London. You're going to throw away the merger because of an imaginary virus? Samia asked, her voice climbing. I'm staying, Liam said, lowering himself to sit on the floor, right where Elena usually mopped. I need to find out who the bucket genius is before I lose what little sanity I have left. Samia left, slamming the door behind her. Liam sat there in the dark as the city lights began flickering outside. He was at the top of the world, surrounded by millions, and he felt like an amateur. He realized that for the first time in his life, he wasn't playing to win money or power. He was playing to be noticed by someone who, in the eyes of the world, barely existed. As the clock crept toward 9 at night, Liam heard the metallic sound of a cleaning cart rolling down the hallway. He held his breath. His heart was pounding harder than it ever had during any billion-dollar merger. He hid behind the heavy velvet curtain, feeling ridiculous. A CEO in his mid-30s playing hide-and-seek in his own office. The door opened. The scent of lavender and lemons swept through the room, cleansing the air thick with stress. Liam saw the silhouette. She didn't turn on the main lights. She worked only by the small flashlight mounted on the cart. She moved toward the chessboard. The silence was so deep that Liam could hear his own pulse. Elena sighed, a tired sound, but filled with a peace that Liam envied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn, chipped wooden piece, placing it gently beside the onyx king. Let's see if you learned your lesson today, Vance, she whispered to no one in particular. Liam took a step forward. The curtain caught on his expensive watch, letting out a tearing sound. He stumbled over his own feet and came crashing to his knees, tumbling out from behind the velvet like a cartoon villain whose ambush had backfired spectacularly. Elena didn't scream. She simply turned slowly, the flashlight beam catching Liam full in the face, on the floor, disheveled, with his jacket sleeve torn. You're terrible at spying, sir, she said, crossing her arms, and your landing technique still needs a lot of disinfectant. Liam looked up, breathless. The mystery had a face. And it was a face that radiated an integrity he didn't know how to buy. True intelligence doesn't need a lit stage to shine. It lights up every room it passes through, even when the only thing in its hand is a mop. The air conditioning in Liam Vance's office hummed like a swarm of metallic bees. But for Elena, a different sound echoed. Chalk dragging across an old blackboard, and the rhythmic clang of a metal bucket swinging against her mother's ankle. Liam was still there, trying to untangle his gold watch from the velvet curtain with the grace of a bear caught in a fishing net. He huffed, face flushed, as a silk thread snapped free with a dry sound of defeat. But Elena didn't see him. Her eyes were fixed on the small wooden piece she had just set on the marble table. The world around her began to dissolve. The tempered glass and brushed steel of Vance Tech gave way to bare concrete, and the smell of fresh rain on Central Plaza, 20 years ago. There she was, little Elena, scraped knees and dirt-stained hands, sitting on a wooden bench that creaked with every shift. Her mother, face worn with exhaustion and hair held up by a loose rubber band, waved from a distance. From the window of the public school where she worked double shifts, the sound of her mother's mop on the ceramic floor was the soundtrack of Elena's childhood. A sound of effort, of quiet dignity. Don't look at the ground, little one. If you only watch where you step, you'll never see the horizon. The voice was raspy, as if it had been polished by decades of tobacco and wisdom. It was Antenor. He sat across from Elena, in front of a chessboard that was nothing more than a piece of plywood with hand-painted squares, already peeling at the corners. The pieces weren't onyx or marble, They were roughly carved blocks of wood, each one carrying its own battle scar. Antenor picked up a piece, a pawn that barely had the shape of a head, and handed it to Elena. The wood was rough, with a tiny splinter pressing into the girl's thumb. "Feel that?" Antenor asked, watching her close her hand around it. "The world will try to tell you that you're like this pawn, that you only exist to be moved by others, to be sacrificed at the start of the game, so the kings and queens can stay safe in their glass palaces." Elena gripped the piece tight. The afternoon sun fell across the board, casting long shadows over the concrete. "But listen carefully, Elena." Antenor leaned forward, his breath smelling of old coffee and integrity. "Life is exactly like this game. If you protect your king out of fear, if you hide your best moves because you're afraid of losing what you have, you end up losing the whole kingdom. Sometimes the pawn has to cross the entire board under crossfire. It has to sacrifice itself, not out of weakness, but to open the path to victory." He pointed toward the school where Elena's mother cleaned the classrooms. "Your mother doesn't clean floors because she lacks the mind for something greater. She cleans the floor so you can walk on it without slipping. Honor her move by being the smartest piece on this board." Antenor then picked up the worn wooden piece, the one that looked like a small monument to resilience, and handed it to her for good. "Keep this. On the day you feel small standing before giants of steel, remember, a pawn that reaches the end of the board can become anything, even a queen." The clack of a chess piece hitting Liam's office floor jolted Elena back. Liam Vance had finally freed himself from the curtain. He stood there trying to straighten his torn jacket, looking like a child who'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He looked at Elena, then at the old wooden piece now resting beside his flawless onyx king. The contrast was almost comical. The luxury piece, cold and perfect, next to the worn wood, warm and full of history. "Where did this come from?" Liam asked, his usual arrogance slipping for a moment, replaced by something genuinely curious. "This piece, it doesn't belong to this set." Elena didn't answer right away. She felt the weight of the piece in the pocket of her blue uniform. She'd slipped it back in the moment Liam broke free. Her fingers brushed the rough wood, feeling the same splinter from 20 years ago. Liam took a step toward her, but slid on a small puddle of cleaning product he'd kicked over when he'd knocked the bucket moments before. He windmilled his arms frantically, looking like a runaway windmill, before grabbing the edge of the table to keep from face-planting all over again. "Careful, sir," Elena said, her voice settling back into its calm, precise tone. "Marble is beautiful, but it doesn't grip like concrete. You've gotten too comfortable with surfaces that shine but don't hold." "What's that supposed to mean?" Liam asked, trying to recover his composure while brushing an invisible smudge from his pants. "I built this empire. I know exactly what holds me up." Elena stepped forward, moving into the cold glow of the monitors. The light from the screens danced across her eyes. "You built glass walls to keep the world out, but you forgot that glass breaks. You play chess to avoid losing, Liam. And anyone who plays just to avoid losing has already started the game defeated." The silence that followed was sharp. Liam felt as if Elena had just landed a precise blow across his entire life strategy. He opened his mouth to fire back, to say she was just the woman who took out his trash, but the words died in his throat. He looked at the board. The move she'd suggested in the earlier note suddenly made overwhelming sense. Elena took hold of her cleaning cart. The metallic wheels on the polished floor echoed like quiet thunder. She headed for the door but stopped just before leaving. Without turning around, she said, "Tomorrow you have the decisive meeting about Central Plaza, don't you?" Liam went still. How did she know that? It was a classified project buried in encrypted files. "How did you?" "Trash talks, sir. Especially the demolition blueprints your assistant Samia threw out last week." Elena pressed the wooden piece in her pocket until the tip dug into her skin. "Just one piece of advice. Don't tear down what you don't have the intelligence to rebuild." She left, trailing only the scent of lavender behind her, and a billionaire CEO standing in the middle of a luxury suite, feeling for the first time in his life like the most insignificant piece on the board. The most valuable inheritance isn't what they leave in your bank account. It's the lessons that sculpt your character. Gold shines, but wood endures. Liam Vance was hiding behind a polished concrete pillar, holding his breath like an actor in a low-budget spy film. The wall clock, a minimalist model worth more than the GDP of a small island, read 10 at night. The silence in the office was absolute, until the metallic, rhythmic sound of the cleaning cart's wheels began to echo down the hallway. The smell of lavender and pine arrived first, announcing her presence like a royal fragrance. Liam watched Elena's silhouette approach the onyx chessboard. She didn't turn on the lights. She moved through the dimness with a confidence he had never owned, not even with all of Manhattan's sun pouring through his windows. He watched her lean in, her long fingers hovering for a moment before settling on the black knight. "Got you now." Liam jumped out from behind the pillar with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning, completely forgetting that one of his laptop charger cables was stretched across the floor. Liam's foot caught the cord. He didn't just stumble. He traced an awkward arc through the air, arms spinning like the blades of a broken helicopter, that before crash-landing chest first onto his own glass coffee table. The impact made a dry thud, and by some miracle the glass held, but Liam's dignity was scattered across the carpet like confetti after a parade. Elena didn't step back. She simply sighed. The kind of sigh a mother gives when her kid spills juice for the 10th time in one day. She pressed the main light switch. The office flooded with a clinical, merciless brightness. Liam, still lying across the table with his face pressed against a yacht catalog, looked up. For the first time, he saw her without shadows, without glass reflections, without the filter of arrogance. And what he saw left him without words. Elena was young, but her eyes carried an old kind of tiredness. Her blue uniform was spotless, but when she crossed her arms, Liam noticed her hands. They weren't the hands of the women he usually dined with at five-star restaurants. They were rough hands, the skin reddened from constant contact with bleach and chemical disinfectants. Her nails were short, and there was a small burn scar from a cleaning product on her left wrist. Liam stood up, trying to ignore the pain in his ribs and the fact that his hair was a disaster. He moved closer, his billionaire brain attempting to process the system error she represented. "Why do you do this?" The question came out hoarse, almost a whisper. "I've seen your moves. I've read your notes. You have a mind that catches variables my best analysts walk right past. Why are you cleaning my floor, Elena?" He reached out, attempting to touch her arm, but Elena stepped back. The movement was subtle, but it carried the distance of an ocean. "You talk as if work were an aesthetic choice, sir," Elena said, and her voice held none of the sharpness from the notes. It was a voice of concrete and reality. "You think intelligence is a magic passport that pays the rent at the end of the month? But you could be anything," Liam exclaimed, gesturing at the luxurious office around them. "A consultant, an international strategist, a CEO." Elena let out a short laugh, joyless. She held her hands out, palms up, showing him the calluses. "Look at these hands, Vance. They don't have time to hold champagne glasses while debating algorithms. They need to hold the mop so my mother can have her medication, and so the roof over our house doesn't cave in. The electricity bill and the grocery store don't wait around for me to find someone willing to pay for my brain, instead of judging me by my uniform." Liam felt something tighten in his throat. He looked at the $1,000 chessboard and felt a sudden flash of shame at his own excess. "I can help you," he said, the billionaire savior instinct kicking in. "I can offer you a position, a salary that— Are you trying to buy me to ease your conscience? Or to win your next game?" Elena cut him off, eyes sharp. "I'm not a piece you move around to feel better about yourself. I'm the person you never would have seen at all if I hadn't moved that rook." The silence that followed was broken by the sharp clack of high heels striking the marble hallway. The door swung open. Samia strode in, her face carrying a poisonous satisfaction, a black leather folder under her arm. "Liam, I finally found you." Samia stopped abruptly, her eyes sweeping the scene. Liam disheveled, shirt untucked, and the cleaning woman standing in the middle of his office. "What's going on here? Why is this woman still in your office?" "She should have left with the trash ages ago." Elena didn't lower her head. She simply shifted to the side, taking hold of her mop with quiet, steady hands. "She was just leaving, Samia," Liam said, his voice suddenly cold. What do you want? The board gave the final verdict, Samia said, dismissing Elena as if she were part of the furniture. She flipped the folder open with a theatrical flourish and dropped a thick document on the chessboard table, knocking the Onyx King over in the process. The demolition contract for Central Plaza. All it needs is your signature. The bulldozers go in Monday. We're finally turning that hangout for old men and pigeons into a 10-story smart parking structure. This is the checkmate your father always wanted. Liam looked at the document. The heading, Sector 4 Revitalization Project, Full Demolition, gleamed under the lights. He felt Elena's gaze before he even turned toward her. The face that had shown exhaustion just moments ago was now pale as marble. The tremor in her hands wasn't from physical effort anymore. It was something deeper. She looked at the folder, then at Liam, and the silence that followed hit harder than anything he'd ever felt in a boardroom. Central Plaza? Elena whispered, and the sound of her voice made Liam want to disappear. It's just business, Elena, Samia said with a sideways smile, sensing she'd struck a nerve. But I don't think you'd understand business, would you? Go clean up the coffee your boss spilled and let the adults work. Elena didn't respond to Samia. She looked straight at Liam, who held his Mont Blanc pen poised over the paper, hand hesitating. She felt Antonor's wooden piece in her pocket, heavy as a secret. Without a word, Elena took hold of her cart. The sound of the wheels was no longer rhythmic, it was a metallic lament. She walked out of the room without looking back, leaving behind the trail of lavender that, in that moment, smelled of goodbye and betrayal. Liam stood there, pen hovering over the contract, feeling the lavender fade as the sharp metallic scent of Samia's ink took over the air. He'd just realized that in the moment he won the contract signature, he had lost the only person who truly saw the board. Opportunities can be bought, but respect and truth are currencies that don't trade in convenience markets. Never sign the end of someone's world to build yourself a parking lot. The New York sun seemed to carry a filter of dust and reality as Liam Vance parked his black luxury car, spotless, silent, too sophisticated for the neighborhood, in front of Central Plaza. The engine gave one last low purr, as if protesting its presence in a place where the asphalt had scars and the dominant smell was burnt pretzels and cheap hope. Liam stepped out, adjusting his linen jacket that cost more than every wooden bench in that plaza combined. He had an Italian leather folder tucked under his arm, holding the fate of this place inside it. But as he walked, a pigeon, acting with the precision of a seasoned sniper, decided that the billionaire's left shoulder was the perfect target for its morning greeting. What the? Liam stared at the white and gray mark on the expensive fabric. He tried to clean it with a silk handkerchief, but only managed to turn the stain into an artistic smear of humiliation. Meanwhile, miles away on the 20th floor of Vance Tech, Samia was not looking at pigeons. She was staring at numbers that were bleeding. The board of directors had sent 3 all-caps emails in the last hour. Her 7-figure bonus depended on that demolition. She tapped the tip of her gold pen against the glass desk, eyes fixed on the screen tracking Liam's car GPS. Central Plaza? What is he doing there? Samia hissed, lips pressed into a thin line of contempt. She remembered the smell of lavender in the office the night before. If that cleaning woman is trying to tank my bonus, I will make every single one of her shifts a living nightmare. Back at the plaza, Liam ignored the pigeon and followed the sound of wooden pieces clacking against concrete tables. There was Elena, seated beside Antonor, surrounded by a group of old men in berets who smelled of tobacco and history. Look who it is, everyone, Antonor announced, pointing at Liam with the stem of an unlit pipe. The Glass King came to visit. He even brought a new decoration for his jacket. The old men erupted in laughter that sounded like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. Liam felt his face burn. I came to observe, Liam said, trying to recover his composure. Central Plaza is a high-risk asset. I need to understand the social engagement logistics here before I... Asset? Logistics? An old man with gold teeth slapped the chessboard table. Son, we play chess here. We don't fill out spreadsheets. Sit down and shut up, or play and show us you've got blood in your veins. Elena looked at Liam. She didn't smile. There was an invisible wall between them, but she pointed to the empty chair in front of a worn plastic board. You said you understand strategy, sir. Let's see how you do without the air conditioning and the leather chairs. Liam accepted the challenge. He sat down, the stained jacket now the running joke for the crowd around him. He opened the game with the Ruy Lopez, moving the pieces with cold, calculated technique. According to Nash's theorem and game theory applied to volatile markets, Liam began explaining as he moved his bishop. Wrong. Elena cut him off, moving a knight without even looking at the board. You're playing with statistics. Street chess is played with the soul. You're so focused on protecting your profit that you didn't notice Antenor has had your queen surrounded for 3 moves now. Liam looked at the board. His hands started trembling slightly. He tried a flanking maneuver, but his leather-soled shoe slipped on a piece of chewing gum stuck to the plaza floor, sending his foot kicking into the table leg. The pieces jumped. The plastic king flew through the air and landed inside an old man's paper coffee cup. Checkmate by caffeine drowning, the group shouted, erupting into another round of laughter. Liam was sweating. The sun beat down on the back of his neck. He looked at Elena, expecting to find mockery, but found something worse, compassion. You're trying to control the wind, Liam, she said quietly, her hands, still rough, but steady now in the sunlight, resetting the pieces. Here, nobody plays to destroy the other person. We play to understand who the other person is. Let go of the technique. Play with what you feel, not with what you've read. For the first time in decades, Liam Vance stopped thinking about profit margins. He looked at the faces of those men, at the worn wooden piece Elena had left on the table. He felt the weight of the contract in his folder. He made a move, a risky move. A rook sacrifice that made no sense in any Harvard textbook. Look at that. The boy's got heart, Antenor murmured, genuinely surprised. For a moment, time stood still. Liam smiled, a real smile. No porcelain teeth for a Forbes cover. He felt that in this dust, in this plaza, he was more of a king than he'd ever been on his glass floor. But the warmth was brutally cut short. A strong gust swept through the plaza, knocking Liam's leather folder off the bench. It fell open, and the demolition contract pages flew out like birds of ill omen, scattering across the concrete. Elena crouched to help gather them. Her eyes landed on the bold header, full demolition plan, Central Plaza, execute Monday. Below it was a map of the plaza with a massive red X drawn over the bench where Antenor was sitting. Elena froze. The paper in her hand felt like it was burning. She looked at the map, then at the smile still lingering on Liam's face, and understanding hit her like a freight truck. So that's it? Elena's voice came out airless, dry as the plaza dust. Elena, I can explain. This document is a formality. Liam tried to stand up, but the chewing gum on his shoe made him stumble into the bench again, snagging his designer pants on a loose nail in the wood. You came here to play with your soul? Elena stood up, her eyes full of an indignation that silenced every old man around them. You came here to scout the grounds before sending in the bulldozers? You used chess to find exactly where our hearts would hurt most before ripping them out? No, Elena, listen. Liam was stuck to the bench, literally anchored to the destruction he himself had signed. I was an idiot, she whispered, angry tears beginning to blur her vision. She threw the map at Liam's face. The paper bounced off his nose and fell to the ground. You are exactly what I thought you were, a man made of glass. Beautiful on the outside, but sharp and hollow on the inside. She turned and ran across the plaza. Antenor looked at Liam with a disappointment that hurt more than any slap. Liam, stuck to the bench, jacket still stained from the pigeon, heart hammering with dread, tried to pull free, but the fabric of his pants tore with a loud, ridiculous vrup. He dropped to his knees on the concrete, surrounded by the papers that had just sentenced that place to death. On the far side of the plaza, Samia watched it all from inside a black SUV with tinted windows, a victorious smile lighting up her face as she typed on her phone. The bonus is locked. He already destroyed her trust. Get the bulldozers ready. Liam Vance was on the ground at Central Plaza, but this time, there was no one to clean up after him. The worst betrayal isn't the one committed by an enemy. It's the one that comes from someone who made you believe your soul was worth more than their profit. The entrance of the Grand Hotel Astoria was a parade of silk, diamonds, and expensive perfume. Liam Vance, wearing a tailored tuxedo that made him look like an action hero, If you ignored the small bandage on his nose and the slight stiffness in his legs from the plaza incident, stood at the top of the staircase holding a gold-embossed invitation in trembling hands. When the yellow taxi with a bumper held on by wire pulled up to the red carpet, silence fell over the guests like a curtain of ice. Elena stepped out. She wore a navy blue dress, simple, in a fabric that didn't catch the spotlights. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she carried a small handbag that had seen better days. But she walked with her back so straight it looked like she was carrying the world on her shoulders. "You came," Liam said, descending the steps and nearly tripping over his own foot when his patent leather shoe found a wet rose petal. He caught himself on the handrail and recovered with a forced clearing of his throat. I needed you here. To show them that Vance Tech isn't just made of concrete." "I didn't come for your company, sir," Elena replied, her voice low as she climbed the steps. "I came because you promised the board would hear Central Plaza's side. Don't make me regret leaving my mother alone tonight." When they entered the main hall, the contrast was violent. The crystal ceiling reflected the shimmer of champagne glasses, while Elena felt like a shadow on an overexposed photograph. A waiter glided past carrying a tray of sturgeon caviar canapés. Liam reached to take one for Elena, but the man smoothly angled his body away in a choreographed move, serving an investor just behind them, and ignoring Elena as if she were part of the wallpaper. "Excuse me, could you—" Liam began, but his voice was swallowed by the piercing sound of a familiar laugh. Samia emerged from the crowd. She was stunning in a fire-red dress that looked like it had been sewn directly onto her body. She held a glass of red wine, a full-bodied Merlot that looked like blood under the chandelier light. "Liam, darling, you finally made it." Samia barely glanced at Liam, fixing her eyes on Elena instead. She stepped forward, faking a dramatic stumble that no first-year acting student would believe. The glass tilted. The red wine traced a perfect arc through the air before landing squarely on the chest of Elena's blue dress. The dark liquid spread quickly, soaking into the simple fabric and running down Elena's rough hands. "Oh, goodness." Samia pressed a hand to her mouth, the most unconvincing look of shock in New York history. "I'm such a disaster. Please forgive me, sweetheart. Though, now that I think about it, the wine actually suits the tone. And honestly, it helps cover that persistent smell of cheap soap and bleach that seems to follow you everywhere." Several guests nearby let out muffled laughs behind gloved hands. Liam felt the heat rise to his face. He stepped forward, but before he could speak, one of the lead investors in the merger, a man who looked like an ancient marble bust, touched his shoulder. "Vance, we have a problem with the London contract. We need your word that demolishing that eyesore of a plaza won't generate bad press." "Who is this young woman?" Liam looked at Elena, who was uselessly dabbing at the wine stain with a paper napkin that had begun to disintegrate against her dress. He looked at the investor, then at the journalists' cameras beginning to focus on the scene. The CEO panic took over. She's a field strategic consultant." Liam stammered, the words tumbling out like he had a mouthful of flour. "We're analyzing the social impact, you see. It's a public relations matter. The plaza is important, of course, but the project's efficiency is our #1 priority." Elena stopped dabbing at her dress. She looked at Liam. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was a deep, silent disillusionment that hurt more than any outburst. Liam had tried to be diplomatic, tried not to disrupt the atmosphere with the billionaires in the room, and in doing so, he had just pushed her back into the basement of insignificance. "Field consultant?" Elena said, her voice steady enough to silence the circle around her. "You can't even say the word cleaning out loud. Can you, sir?" "Excuse me. I think this ballroom has too much perfume and not enough character." She turned and walked toward the exit, the wine stains spreading across her back like a wound. Liam tried to follow, but his foot caught the train of another guest's gown. He pulled, heard the sound of fabric tearing, and ended up knocking over a tower of champagne flutes on a side table. The sound of shattering crystal echoed through the hall. Liam was on the floor, surrounded by sparkling foam and judgmental stares as Elena disappeared through the gilded doors and back into the cold Manhattan night. Samia moved to Liam's side, helping him up with the smile of a victorious snake. You see, Liam? Fish out of water always end up suffocating. She doesn't belong in this world. Samia dabbed a drop of champagne from his face. But I have an idea to put this to rest once and for all. How about an integration tournament at the company? A corporate chess challenge. We give her the chance to prove that brain you so admire in front of the entire board. Samia leaned closer, the whisper thick with poison. If she wins, you reconsider the plaza. If she loses, which she will because I'll make sure of it, she resigns and disappears from your life and from that plaza forever. Checkmate, don't you think? Liam stared at the closed doors through which Elena had vanished. He tasted the bitterness of champagne and his own cowardice. He agreed with a nod, not realizing he was walking straight into Samia's final trap. Outside, Elena walked along the sidewalk, arms wrapped tight around herself against the freezing wind. She looked at the stain on her dress, then at her hands. They still smelled of wine and humiliation. But in her pocket, her fingers found Antenor's wooden piece. The wood was warm. A pawn that reaches the end of the board. She whispered into the darkness, the last of her tears drying as a glint of steel appeared in her eyes. A person's worth is not measured by the silk they wear, but by the courage to keep their head high when the world tries to stain their dignity. Wine dries. Character is indelible. The main auditorium at Vance Tech looked like a modern coliseum built of titanium and cool LED lights. At the center of the stage, under a spotlight powerful enough to reveal every particle of dust floating in the air, sat a tempered glass table with a state-of-the-art electronic chessboard. The ambient sound was a constant murmur from hundreds of employees in gray suits, the kind of sound that reminded you of an agitated beehive about to swarm. Liam Vance sat in the front row, his tie so tight he could feel his pulse in his throat. He was doing his best to hold an expression of authority, but his hands were submerged in a bucket of ice hidden under his chair, a desperate attempt to calm the trembling that had gripped him since he agreed to Samia's challenge. Ladies and gentlemen, Samia's voice rang out through the speakers, laced with a poisonous sweetness. She walked the stage with the confidence of someone who already knew how the story ended. Today, our humble colleague from custodial services, Elena, will face none other than the renowned international master, Alistair Thorne. Thorne entered the stage. He was a man who looked as if he had been carved from an ancient glacier. His eyes were a metallic shade of gray, stripped of any warmth. He didn't walk. He glided with a mathematical coldness. He sat at the table, adjusted the timer with surgical precision, and fixed his gaze on the middle distance, treating Elena as if she were part of the rarefied air in the room. When Elena stepped onto the stage, the murmur from the crowd changed. It was no longer curiosity. It was a hiss of disapproval. Is that her? The one they say earned her consultant title in the dark hallways? A woman's voice called from the third row, loud enough for everyone to hear. I heard she doesn't even know the rules. She's only here because Vance has a peculiar taste for uniforms. A financial analyst shot back, letting out a short laugh. Samia, strategically positioned near a group of journalists, was whispering confidential details about how Elena was using her proximity to the executive floor to try to save Central Plaza. The rumor spread like ink on blotting paper. A low boo started in the back of the auditorium and grew, turning into a chorus of judgment that hit Elena like a gust of freezing wind. Elena stopped in the middle of the stage. She was wearing her usual blue uniform. Her legs were trembling so badly she had to press her hand against the acrylic chair back to keep from falling. Her fingers, still rough and marked by hard work, contrasted painfully with the smooth, high-tech surface of the game table. She looked down to the front row. Her eyes searched for Liam. She needed a signal, a nod, a look that said he believed in her, that he didn't see her the way the others did. Liam felt her gaze. His heart lurched. A silent cry of support rose in his throat. But with the investors' cameras focused on him and Samia's warning stare in his peripheral vision, he simply lowered his head. He pretended to adjust his shirt cuff, dropping his gaze to his own lap, leaving Elena alone under the merciless spotlight. Liam's silence was the heaviest blow. Elena felt the cold of the acrylic rise up through her arms. She sat down, feeling small, an intruder in a glass temple that rejected her with every fiber of its being. Thorn finally looked at her. There was no respect in his eyes, only the boredom of a calculator confronting an insignificant variable. Without a word, he extended a pale hand and moved the king's pawn to e4. The first move, the king's pawn opening. Classic, aggressive, and devastating in a professional's hands. The electronic board beeped, projecting the move onto giant screens around the auditorium. The crowd let out a collective ooh, followed by scattered laughter, the beginning of the end. Elena stared at the white pieces advancing. The ozone smell of the electronic equipment and the investor's expensive cologne were suffocating her. Her eyes burned. For a second, the board blurred behind tears she refused to let fall. She felt Antenor's wooden piece in the side pocket of her uniform. She squeezed it, feeling the wood splinter press into her palm, a physical reminder that the concrete of the plaza was real, while everything in this room was just an illusion. "The clock is running, young lady." Thorn's voice cracked through the air like a dry branch, snapping in winter. "Or are you waiting for the floor to clean itself before making your move?" More laughter erupted in the auditorium. Samia crossed her arms, a smile of triumph lighting up her face. Liam remained frozen, a statue of cowardice amid the luxury. Elena breathed in deep. The air filled her lungs, carrying the residual scent of lavender from her own hands. She pictured the concrete board at the plaza, overlaying the high-tech glass in front of her. The fear was still there, but something new had begun to pulse in her chest. She extended her trembling hand toward the black pieces. The fate of Central Plaza, of her mother, and of her own dignity was suspended by a silk thread that Liam Vance hadn't had the courage to hold. She moved her piece, not like a servant, but like someone who already knew how the game ended. The loneliness at the top of a lit stage hurts less than the silence of someone who promised to stand beside you. When the world boos, the only voice that matters is the one inside your own conscience. The digital chess clock at the center of the table pulsed red, marking the seconds with the precision of a gavel in a courtroom. Alistair Thorn, the international master, had just consolidated his advantage. He leaned back in the acrylic chair, crossing his long, pale fingers over his chest. On the giant screen behind the stage, the computer analysis showed an overwhelming white bar. Elena's defeat was statistically inevitable. In the auditorium, the investors' laughter was a white noise of contempt. Samia leaned back in her seat, savoring the moment. In the front row, Liam Vance looked like a man trying to disappear inside his own suit. The ice in the bucket under his chair had long since melted, leaving only lukewarm water that mirrored his own indecision. Elena felt a drop of cold sweat slide between her shoulder blades. The auditorium's air conditioning was on full blast, but her face was burning. Her fingers slipped into the pocket of her blue uniform, finding Antenor's worn wooden piece. The rough texture and the scent of old oak hit her like an electric shock. She wasn't in a titanium auditorium anymore. She was at the plaza, where the wind didn't ask permission, and the game had no statistics, only courage. She stopped looking at the clock. She stopped looking at Thorn. With a sharp, deliberate move, Elena advanced her knight to the center of the board. Thorn raised an eyebrow, a flicker of mockery crossing his metallic gaze. He responded instantly, capturing the knight. Elena didn't hesitate. She began moving pieces at a frightening pace, the click of acrylic against glass echoing like blank gunshots through the silent auditorium. "Has she lost her mind?" a financial director whispered. "She's throwing the game." Elena moved her queen to a completely exposed position, directly in front of Thorn's rook. It looked like a beginner's blunder, a tactical suicide. The auditorium erupted in collective laughter. Samia let out a theatrical sigh of relief. Thorn, with a half-smile that never reached his eyes, reached out to remove the black queen from the board. "It's over, young lady," Thorn murmured, his voice dry. "Cleaning finished early today?" Elena said nothing. Her hands, marked by hours gripping brooms and mops, were no longer trembling. While Thorn still held the black queen in the air, Elena moved a side pawn to the last row of the board. The silence that followed was so heavy that the hum of the projectors sounded like thunder. Thorn froze. His hand, still holding the captured queen, hung suspended mid-air. He looked at the pawn, then at his own king, then back at the board he thought he had controlled. The queen's sacrifice hadn't been a mistake. It had been the bait. By capturing the most powerful piece, Thorne had opened a blind corridor that Elena had been building 10 moves ago. The analysis computer on the giant screen made an electronic click. The white bar disappeared. A massive green banner lit up, reflecting across the glass walls of Vance Tech. Checkmate. The auditorium plunged into total silence. Hundreds of people, whose salaries depended on logic and strategy, stood open-mouthed. The master had been defeated by an advanced pawn under the command of a janitor. Elena breathed. For the first time all night, the air wasn't suffocating. This was the moment she'd been reaching for. But the glass world never accepts defeat gracefully. Samia shot to her feet, her chair toppling backward with a crash that broke the audience's trance. "Stop," she screamed, her voice climbing an octave. She pointed a long, perfectly manicured finger at Elena. "This is impossible. Alistair Thorne doesn't lose to someone who can barely read a contract. She's cheating." The audience, sensing the shift in the current, began murmuring again, but now the tone was one of aggressive suspicion. "Look at her earpiece." Samia moved toward the stage, her designer heels striking the floor like a whip. She must be using a hidden receiver under her hair. "Liam, are you going to let this farce continue? Your company's reputation is on the line because of a fraud." Liam Vance stood up. The pressure of the board, watching him with shark eyes, pressed down on his shoulders. He looked at Elena, still seated at the victorious board. The brightness in her eyes was a purity he hadn't seen in a mirror in years. But the fear of scandal was stronger. "Elena," Liam started, his voice coming out weak and political. "Just so there are no doubts before the board and the investors. Could you please explain the technical reasoning behind that queen sacrifice? It sounded a little too fortunate, don't you think?" Elena looked at Liam. The punch to the gut was physical. She felt her lungs deflate. He hadn't asked for her earpiece to be searched. But the fact that he was asking for a technical explanation, that he was doubting her the moment the victory was won, hurt more than Samia's direct accusation. He was choosing the glass side again. "Explain?" Elena rose slowly. She didn't look at Samia, whose nostrils were flaring with rage. She looked directly into Liam's eyes. "You want a technical explanation for how a simple person can be intelligent without needing a Harvard diploma?" Liam tried to take a step forward. "That's not what I meant. I just need to ensure the process is transparent for—" "Transparent?" Elena let out a short, humorless laugh that cut through his sentence. "You talk about transparency in a room where nobody can see past the shine of their own bonus." With a firm motion, Elena reached to her collar. She unclipped the Vance Tech badge, the blue plastic card that had been her only connection to that world. She held it up for a moment, letting the spotlight reflect her name back across the room, then slammed it down hard onto the glass board. The sound of plastic striking the electronic display was the only noise in the auditorium. "I won the game, but I've lost interest in being part of this board," Elena said, her voice calm now, carrying an authority that no title could ever grant. "I don't need to prove my worth to people who don't have the greatness to see it on their own." She walked toward the side exit. Samia moved to say something, but Elena's expression was so sharp that the woman took an involuntary step back. Liam stood frozen in the center of the front row, the melted ice bucket at his feet. He looked at the badge abandoned on the chessboard, then at Elena's back as she disappeared. He owned the building, the technology, the money. But in that moment, seated among the most powerful men in the city, Liam Vance felt like the smallest piece on the entire board. Outside, the night breeze carried the smell of rain and earth. Elena walked along the sidewalk, hands in her pockets, gripping the wooden piece. She no longer had a job, no longer had Liam's support, and the plaza was still in danger. But for the first time, she didn't feel like a janitor in someone else's world. She was the queen of her own story. True victory isn't about silencing your critics. It's about walking away with your head high from a table where your integrity isn't welcome. The value of a gem doesn't depend on who looks at it, but on the purity of the one who carries it. The coffee in Liam Vance's hand was cold, but he didn't notice. He stood in front of the vast glass wall of his Vance Tech office, staring at the New York skyline, but his eyes weren't on the skyscrapers. Down below, tiny as ants, yellow bulldozers were beginning to circle Central Plaza. The muffled sound of the machines rose through the ventilation shafts like the growl of a hungry animal. Liam tried to take a sip of coffee, but the cup trembled. He remembered the sound of Elena's badge hitting the glass board. That sound still echoed in his mind, louder than the engines below. The oak door to his office flew open. Samia walked in, her stiletto heels hammering the marble floor. She carried a bottle of champagne and 2 crystal flutes. "Victory, Liam!" she exclaimed, her voice overflowing with a metallic joy. "The board approved immediate execution. The bulldozers are already in position. Our performance bonus will be credited before sunset." Liam didn't turn around. His eyes were fixed on an old man sitting on a plaza bench, refusing to move as a bulldozer crept closer. It was Antenor. "Samia, the social impact reports," Liam said, his voice rough. "I read through them again this morning. Every one of them says the plaza is a vacant lot with no historical value. But I was there. I played there." Samia stopped pouring the champagne. Her smile didn't vanish. It froze into a porcelain mask. "Liam, darling, you're being sentimental. Those reports were validated by the top risk consultancy." "No." Liam finally turned. He walked to her desk and picked up a file folder he'd retrieved from records that morning. "I requested the originals from the archive. These copies you gave me to sign say the community supports the demolition. But the originals are full of resident signatures begging for preservation." Liam dropped the papers on the desk. Several slipped into the champagne flutes, soaking up the expensive liquid and turning transparent. "You falsified the data, Samia. You erased the people from the paperwork so the profit would look clean." Samia set the bottle down. The sound of glass against the desk was sharp. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped toward him, the scent of roses and ambition filling the air between them. "And what are you going to do, Liam?" she hissed. "You already signed. Your signature is on every eviction order. If you admit you made a mistake, the board will destroy you. You'll lose the title, the car, this view. You'll just be an ordinary man with a ruined name. Choose the glass or the dust." Liam looked at his own hands. They were too clean, too soft. He remembered the feel of the wood splinter pressing into Elena's palm. He felt a sudden nausea, a reflux of all the expensive food and empty words he'd swallowed over the years to hold his empire together. He reached for the original demolition contract, the document with the board's gold seal, sitting on the desk, ready for final filing. "Liam, what are you doing?" Samia's tone shifted to a controlled panic. Without a word, Liam began tearing the paper. It wasn't a dramatic movie rip. It was physical effort. The paper was thick and resistant. He used his teeth to get the first tear started, a visually ridiculous image for a billionaire CEO, but he didn't care. He tore the contract into thin strips, then into smaller pieces, until the demolition order was nothing but white confetti scattered across the Persian rug. "You've lost your mind," Samia screamed, scrambling to gather the pieces. "I'm calling security. I'll tell them you had a breakdown." "Tell them," Liam answered, grabbing his jacket and walking out of the office. "Tell them I finally woke up." He didn't take the private elevator. He ran down the emergency stairwell, the sweat soaking through his $1,000 shirt. When he burst into the lobby, he tripped over a cleaning bucket left by a new staff member. He hit the wet floor face first, sliding several feet under the stunned stares of dozens of shareholders waiting for a meeting. Liam stood up, hair wild, face smeared with soapy water, a strip of adhesive tape stuck to the knee of his torn pants. He looked like a disaster. He was the opposite of the flawless Forbes hero. The shareholders, led by the marble-faced man from the gala dinner, closed in. "Vance? What does this mean?" "The bulldozers have stopped." Liam spat a mouthful of soapy water and looked at the group. "It means Vance Tech isn't building anything over that plaza," he said, his voice resonant now despite his pathetic appearance. "I was a coward. I let the shine of this company blind me to what's real. I signed lies because it was easier than facing the truth." He pulled off his wristwatch, a one-of-a-kind collector's piece, and tossed it to the nearest financial analyst, who nearly dropped it. "Keep the watch, the office, and Samia. I'm going after what actually matters. And I promise you, it's not in this building." He pushed through the revolving glass door. He miscalculated the rotation, got briefly wedged, shoulder bumping against the glass. He let out a grunt of pain, shoved it forward, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The sun was setting, painting the street orange. Liam started running toward Central Plaza. No car, no security detail, and his leather-soled shoes sent him sliding at every corner. He looked like a man on the run, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was running home. In the distance, he spotted Elena's silhouette standing in front of a bulldozer, arms crossed, the fading light catching her hair. Liam stopped for a second, breathless, the cold air burning his lungs. His hands were trembling, but now from adrenaline, not fear. He knew the road to forgiveness would be harder than any corporate merger. But he was ready to get his hands dirty in the dust to rebuild what he'd almost helped destroy. Courage isn't born from perfection. It's born from the moment you decide to stop polishing your image and start cleaning your soul. Making mistakes is human. Fighting to fix them is what makes us real. The yellow dust kicked up by the bulldozer's tires hung in the air like a fog of defeat. Antenor was bent over the stone table, his knotted hands struggling to fold a vinyl chessboard that refused to lie flat. Beside him, Elena was stacking damp cardboard boxes, pulling out old photographs and small brass trophies that had decorated the plaza's shelter for decades. The metallic sound of a failing gear echoed down the street. Liam Vance appeared at the corner, but he wasn't the man the newspapers knew. His white silk shirt was stained with soap and soot, 3 buttons missing. His expensive jacket hung from one shoulder like a worn rag, and one of his luxury shoes made a sucking sound with every step, the result of stepping into an oil puddle somewhere along the way. Elena stopped, a box in her arms. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of him. "What do you want here, Liam?" Her voice cracked like a whip. "Did you come to see the work up close? Come to check if the dust matches your new glass project?" Liam stopped 2 meters away. He tried to steady himself, but his foot slipped on the gravel, sending his arms windmilling to keep from falling. I didn't come for the project," he said, breathless. Sweat ran down his face, leaving clean streaks through the grime. "I came to stay." Antenor let out a raspy laugh without taking his eyes off the board. "Stay? A prince in a pigsty?" The old man pointed to the stone bench covered in pigeon droppings and moss. "Sit right there, President. Let's see how long your suit holds up against reality." Liam looked at the bench, then at his own pants, a pair that cost the price of a decent car. With a sigh that seemed to expel the last remnants of arrogance from his lungs, he sat down. The sound of fine fabric scraping against rough stone was audible. He didn't flinch when a green moss stain spread across the impeccable cloth. "If you want to help, Samia sent word that the bulldozers start back up in 10 minutes, Elena said, turning back to packing books from the small community library. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face stayed rigid. "Samia isn't in charge of anything anymore," Liam replied, looking at Elena's rough hands and then at his own, which were starting to show red calluses for the first time in his life. "Is that so?" Antenor shuffled over, carrying a bucket of gray water and a rag that looked like it had been used to clean a truck engine. "If you're one of us now, prove it. That stone table over there is covered in gum and grease. If it isn't shining in 20 minutes, I'll throw you out of my plaza myself." Elena looked at the old man in surprise, then at Liam. She expected him to stand up, curse, and call his driver. Instead, Liam looked at the bucket. He stood up, stripped off the $1,000 jacket, and tossed it onto a pile of garbage without looking back. He grabbed the filthy rag. The cold, dirty water splashed onto his white shirt when he dumped it into the bucket. He knelt on the hot concrete and started scrubbing the stone table. "Put your back into it, boy," Antenor shouted, now settled in a beach chair, watching with sadistic pleasure. "Scrub like your life depends on it, because ours depends on this place." The scene was visually absurd. The man who made decisions about the city's GDP was on his hands and knees, sweating, fighting a petrified piece of gum on a public plaza table. Liam huffed, muscles protesting, his tie, which he'd forgotten to take off, dipping into the dirty water with every stroke. Elena watched in silence. She saw the moment Liam's hand began to bleed slightly from the roughness of the stone. She saw the real effort, the clumsiness of someone who had never had to clean anything in his life, but also the persistence of someone with nothing left to lose. After what felt like an eternity, Liam stopped. He was soaked, dirty, and exhausted. The table wasn't perfect, but it was clean. Done, Liam said, his voice trembling from the physical effort. Elena walked over slowly. She stopped beside him, the smell of sweat and cheap soap replacing the designer cologne. Silence settled over the plaza, broken only by the distant rumble of bulldozers that seemed to be running out of patience. "Why now, Liam?" she asked, her tone softening for the first time. "The contract is signed. The machines are right there. You own all of this." Liam looked at her. He didn't look away the way he had in the auditorium. "I don't own anything, Elena. I was just a tenant in a castle of lies that Samia built, and I agreed to furnish." He reached into his wet pants pocket and pulled out a crumpled envelope, sealed with the emblem of a New York public notary. "I stopped by the land registry before I came here. I used my personal shares to clear the debt and transfer the title." Elena took the envelope with hesitant hands. When she opened it, her eyes went wide. It wasn't an eviction order. It was a deed of donation. "Antenor and Elena Community Preservation Foundation," she read aloud, her voice breaking. Antenor shot to his feet so fast his beach chair nearly flew out from under him. He grabbed the paper and held it up, sniffing it as if he could smell justice. "The plaza? The plaza no longer belongs to Vance Tech?" the old man asked, a single tear crossing the creases of his face. "The plaza now belongs to the people who play in it," Liam said, rising slowly on unsteady legs. "It's protected by a perpetual preservation clause. No glass will go up here as long as there's a chess piece on these tables." The nearest bulldozer released a cloud of black smoke and cut its engine. The operator climbed down from the cab, took off his hat, and waved. The order to stand down had come through on the radio. Elena looked out at the plaza. The trees, the stone benches, the old men beginning to emerge from the shadows with disbelieving smiles. Then she looked at Liam. He was a mess, dirty, disheveled, dignity in tatters. But in his eyes, she no longer saw the reflection of the CEO. She saw the boy who had once gotten lost in his own ambition, and who had finally found his way back. "You look terrible, Liam," Elena said, a small laugh escaping her lips mixed with a tear of relief. "I've never felt better," he answered, smiling back. Suddenly, a loud clang of metal hitting the ground broke the moment. Antenor had deliberately kicked his bucket of dirty water over at Liam's feet. "Don't celebrate yet, glass boy," the old man exclaimed with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "You still haven't finished scrubbing the bench in the back, and this time, less soap and more heart." Liam looked at the bench. He looked at Elena. Then, without hesitating, he picked up the rag again. The world of luxury was behind him. But the warmth of belonging to something real was only just beginning. True humility isn't thinking less of yourself, it's thinking less about yourself. Where pride builds walls of glass, kindness plants roots that no machine can uproot. The sun said goodbye to New York, leaving behind a sky dyed deep purple and iron gray. In Central Plaza, the silence was absolute, except for the soft crackle of dry leaves in the wind and the metallic stillness of the bulldozers, now idle and abandoned like the carcasses of defeated monsters. The smell of hot asphalt and dust was slowly giving way to the damp fragrance of earth that would finally stay exactly where it was. Liam Vance sat on the wooden bench at the north end, the same bench he had just scrubbed with the energy of a man with everything to prove. His hands were red, his palms stinging with small cuts that throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He looked at his own fingers, dirty with grease and moss, and felt the absence of the luxury watch no longer on his wrist. The emptiness on his arm felt, strangely, like relief. Elena sat down beside him. She was no longer in her custodial blue uniform. The fabric was torn at the shoulder and stained from the fight of the day. She watched Antenor, a few meters away, reorganizing the domino pieces with surgical obsession, as if each tile were a brick in the foundation of this new world. "You're a terrible bench cleaner, Vance," Elena said, her voice soft, but keeping the characteristic edge that was her armor. "You left a soap stain right there in the corner." "An amateur." Liam let out a short laugh that ended in a tired sigh. He looked at the lights of Vance Tech glowing in the distance, a glass obelisk that now seemed like a faraway, unreachable galaxy. "I spent my whole life playing not to lose, Elena," he began, his voice sounding strange in that quiet, stripped of the projected authority of boardrooms. "On the board, in business, at dinner. I thought victory was the accumulation of things I could lock behind a titanium door. I moved people like disposable pawns, sacrificing anything to keep the king safe. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, fingers interlaced, the trembling he could no longer hide revealing itself in his hands. But today, watching you face that ice-cold master, and then standing in front of that bulldozer, I finally understood the critical error in my code. The game is only worth playing if you have someone to win it for. If the victory doesn't have a face, it's just a cold number on an LED screen. Elena didn't answer right away. She watched a small beetle walking along the edge of the wooden bench. She held out her finger, let it climb on, and gently carried it to a nearby leaf. The silence between them wasn't the icy vacuum of the auditorium. It was a charged silence, like the air before a summer rain. "I'm not a trophy, Liam," she said finally, turning to face him. The yellow light from the street lamps reflected in her eyes, revealing a depth that no market analysis could ever capture. "And this plaza isn't a consolation prize. You almost destroyed the only thing that kept me whole. You hid behind paperwork, while the real world bled out here." Liam lowered his head. "I know. Forgiveness isn't a contract you sign and file away," Elena continued, her hand rising to touch the cut on Liam's palm. A light touch that made him shiver. "But I see the effort in these hands. And I can see that, for the first time, it's real." She gave a small smile, a flicker of hope cutting through the dark. "But let me make one thing very clear, former president. Here in the plaza, the hierarchy is different. I'm the one in charge of the board. If you want a seat at the table, you'll have to learn to play by my rules. And that includes not using silk ties to clean stone tables." Liam felt a knot dissolve in his throat. He looked at Elena, at the unshakable strength that radiated from her even in that worn-down state, and felt a wave of gratitude that left him breathless. "I accept the terms of the contract," he whispered. Liam leaned in, the scent of lavender from her hands mixing with the smell of earth and sweat. He hesitated for a second, the fear of rejection stronger than any fear of bankruptcy. Elena, however, closed the distance. She held his face in her rough hands, the contrast between the gentleness of the gesture and the toughness of her skin being the final proof of her truth. When their lips met, there were no violins or corporate fireworks. It was a kiss that tasted of dust and redemption, a meeting of two worlds that had collided and finally found a shared axis. In the background, a sharp, rhythmic crack broke the romantic atmosphere. Antenor had just knocked an entire row of dominoes across the stone table with a triumphant sweep. "Checkmate on loneliness," the old man shouted, raising both arms to the dark sky as the other old men burst into laughter and rhythmic applause. The sound of domino tiles hitting the concrete echoing like a round of celebratory gunshots. Liam and Elena pulled apart, laughing against their own will, watching the joyful chaos taking over the place that had almost become a parking lot. Liam looked at his jacket lying on the trash pile, then at the woman beside him. He no longer held the title of most powerful man in the city, but with Elena's hand woven into his, he knew he had just made the most valuable acquisition of his life. The glass trap had shattered, and what remained were the shards of an old life and the fertile ground of a new reality. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it clears the path to the future. Sometimes you have to lose the whole world to finally find your place inside an embrace. The sound of progress in Central Plaza had changed its tune. It was no longer the aggressive growl of Samia's bulldozers, but the steady, harmonious rhythm of hammers shaping wood and children's laughter weaving between new lavender beds. 6 months had passed since the glass prints slipped in the soap, and the landscape now reflected a richness that no bank statement could measure. Where cracked concrete had stood, the Antenor and Elena Strategic Center now rose. An open pavilion built from recycled oak and stones polished by the hands of the community itself, where professional chessboards sat alongside state-of-the-art computers dedicated to digital literacy for the neighborhood. Miles away, in an industrial suburb forgotten by the sun, Samia was adjusting her pencil skirt, visibly frayed at the edges now. She sat in a 2-square-meter office with depressingly gray walls and a fluorescent light that buzzed and flickered. In front of her, an endless pile of tax forms to process. "Coffee, Samia?" asked a coworker, a man wearing a duck print tie, chewing a tuna sandwich with his mouth open. Samia stared at the chipped plastic cup and the mustard stain on the particle board desk. She had once served champagne in crystal flutes to billionaires, and now she was fighting with a jammed stapler. Justice arrived not with handcuffs, but with the gray mediocrity she had always despised. Back at the plaza, the air smelled of popcorn and wet earth. Liam Vance was sitting at his favorite table. Number 1. He wore simple khaki pants and a navy polo shirt. His hands, once soft and useless for physical work, now bore the proud scars of someone who had helped carry the beams of the new pavilion. "You're taking way too long to move that, Bishop Vance." Elena's voice came loaded with playful challenge. She sat across from him, wearing a light dress that swayed in the breeze. Her eyes, once always on alert, now radiated a vibrant peace. She was no longer the invisible janitor. She was the director of the foundation that had changed the fate of that neighborhood. "I'm just analyzing the variables," Liam replied, eyes bright. "You taught me that rushing a move is the first step to walking into a trap. Less philosophy, more action, glass boy." Antenor shouted from a nearby table where he was attempting to teach dominoes to a group of Vance Tech interns who now came to the plaza to learn real strategy. The old man wore a new straw hat and a vest covered in chess medals he had restored himself. Liam moved his piece, a polished, imposing black onyx king. Elena smiled and with a steady hand moved her defense. Beside Liam's king, resting against the edge of the professional board, was an object that seemed out of place. The old worn wooden piece, the oak pawn that Antenor had given her. The wooden piece was the heart of the game. It reminded everyone that greatness doesn't need shine to be solid. "Check," Elena announced, leaning forward. Liam looked at the board, then at the plaza full of life around them, and finally at the woman who had rescued him from his own glass dome. He realized that, at that table, no one cared who he had been. They cared who he was now. The man who could hold a mop with the same dignity as a gold pen. "I surrender," Liam said, leaning back on the bench, hands laced behind his head. In every sense of the word. A sudden crash of something breaking interrupted the moment. Antenor had attempted a dramatic domino move and ended up knocking his chamomile tea mug onto an intern's pants. The young man, rather than getting annoyed, started laughing along with the old man as they both tried to clean up the mess with paper napkins. Elena laughed, a clear, bright sound that seemed to light up the plaza more than any LED spotlight. She reached her hand across the board and Liam held it. The contrast between her skin and his was no longer a social chasm. It was a bridge built with respect and truth. The sun set behind the buildings, but Central Plaza stayed lit. Not because of electricity, but because of the recovered dignity of every person who found in that place somewhere to be heard. The game went on, but now the rules were written with kindness, and the final prize wasn't power, but the freedom to walk with your head held high. On the horizon of that new life, Elena and Liam knew that the Board of Destiny would always hold new challenges. But now, neither of them would be playing alone. Talent can be hidden anywhere, under any uniform, but it's character that decides who wins the game of life. Never underestimating anyone is, and always will be, the most brilliant move a human being can make. In the end, Elena discovered that her true strength was never in the uniform she wore, but in the courage to keep believing in her own worth even when the world tried to make her feel small. Liam learned that money can buy buildings, contracts, and power, but never the respect of honest people. And together, they proved that no one is too small when they decide to move the right piece at the right moment. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or treated like you were invisible, remember this. Some of the most extraordinary people in the world also started out being seen as just one more. But a pawn that keeps moving forward can change the entire game. And now I want to hear from you. What was the most powerful moment in this story? Do you think Liam truly deserved Elena's forgiveness? And if you were in her place, would you have given him a second chance? Leave your answer in the comments, because I read every single one of them. And your messages are what motivate us to keep creating new stories to bring to this channel. And if this story touched your heart in any way, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones coming soon. The end.